Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Board. It's March 3rd. We're going to call this meeting to order at 6:53 p.m. in the absence of Chair Julian. I'm going to be chairing tonight's committee. Clerk, if you would call the roll.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, Pledge of Allegiance?
It's fine to do the roll first, and then we can do.
Let's do a roll call first.
Okay. Leoncio?
Present.
Okay. Board Member Yanis?
Present.
Okay. Board Member Fernandez?
Present.
Vice Chairman Len Matos?
Present.
And Fred Senra, Raul de la Sera, and Chairman Julia are absent.
We have quorum.
Yes, we do have quorum.
Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Board Member Fernandez. If we can take a moment, please, to review the minutes. If we're ready to proceed, I need a motion to accept the minutes as
I'll make a
presented.
motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And if you'd like, Attorney,
Okay.
to address the issue, please, if you would, about the variance.
Okay. So, thank you, Chair. Dear board members, earlier this evening, we had an applicant who had been scheduled to appear before us, Mr. Randy Cano. I understand, Mr. Leoncio, that you were going to recuse yourself this evening. Okay. If you can turn on your mic, Mr. Leoncio, because I couldn't hear you.
Yes, I will have to excuse myself.
Okay, and that's perfectly fine to do so. The issue is, though, that because you had to recuse yourself, there was not sufficient, there were insufficient board members to constitute quorum, so we were unable to hear the matter.
Okay.
So something that I was suggesting to the chair, and if you all decide you can adopt it as an official rule of your committee, is that from going forward, you all stay in communication and let your presence known, either that you're going to be absent or that you're going to need to recuse yourself, to Ms. Sheppel, the deputy clerk. Because one thing that the deputy clerk also needs to do is, if you do need to recuse yourself, you need to fill out certain documents and certain forms so that you can put it on the record and as per Florida law, document the reasons why you're recusing yourself. Under Florida Chapter 286, okay, which covers everything dealing with sunshine and most public meetings, it is a requirement for you to vote, and you can only not vote if there is a conflict, and you do have a conflict. I understand that you're assisting them with the plan, so that's an obvious conflict. You can't represent them. You can't vote, but you do need to document that ahead of time. So we'll go ahead and we'll make those documents, and I'll ask Ms. Sheppel to forward those documents to the actual form that you need to fill out if you ever do have a conflict, so that you can file that ahead of time and you can let her know. And then also that way she knows exactly how many folks are going to be here, and we can advise the applicant ahead of time, hey, look, we're going to need to postpone and continue your hearing because we don't have quorum. So in order to maintain good communication, that would be my suggestion.
Okay, I just for the record, I didn't know that I had to fill out all those documents.
I know you didn't.
Because
Board member.
before, I had a couple of other projects while I was a member, and I excused myself without filling anything out.
Okay.
So, but I'll whatever needs to be done, I'll do.
Okay.
Okay?
Perfect.
Right, so obviously with what's happened, it's been a learning experience for all of us, and now we know that. I think I'm going to go ahead and make a motion then to, the morning of the meeting, that we all accept the responsibility to check in with the clerk to ensure that we will be able to attend to the best of our ability. And if we know after reviewing the agenda that we need to recuse ourselves, to let the clerk know.
So you need a second, and then
Yes, I need a second for that motion.
Second?
Okay. Is there any discussion?
I would say maybe even sooner.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, just for the clarity, is that I would assume that prior to that day of, the clerk would reach out to us for confirmation, and then if a circumstance changed, for us to let her know prior to the meeting starting, so that way the onus would fall on her to confirm with all of us. We tell her yes, and if from that initial confirmation till that day, that morning of, if our circumstances change, to let her know at that time. Then it's our responsibility to let her know that we're no longer confirmed.
Am I correct that the agenda went out on Friday? Was that the date it went out?
Yes, it went out on Friday.
So we had a shorter than normal window
Correct.
this time as well.
Correct.
And normally we would have that agenda 7 days in advance, correct?
Correct.
Would you like to make an amendment to the motion?
I would amend it to, and I think this is always done, after the parties has confirmed, and conversely, we may say we're unavailable and then circumstances change and we are. But for us, after you have confirmed with us, once we receive the agenda, which should be, you're right, my understanding, 7 days before.
Right.
Once we have it, to then give us the opportunity to let you know if we have to recuse ourselves or if a circumstance beyond our control occurred and we can no longer appear. And that way, at least prior to everyone being here and the residents gathering everyone, there's some sort of an understanding as to who's actually going to appear or not, or who has to be, who's recused. So I guess
So
that's the
just so I understand, you want me to reach out the morning of or a couple days before?
No, I think once you reach out, after that, it's our responsibility to tell you if we can no longer go.
Okay, so 7 days before. All right.
I'll accept that amendment.
Yeah.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So for clarification then, that would be, in looking at the agenda, why we are moving on past item 4A and moving on to item 5A.
that is correct. And item 5A, would you like me to read the ordinance?
Please.
Okay. Item 5A is an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Miami Lakes, Florida, relating to landscape regulations, amending Chapter 13, Land Development Code, add Article 7, Alternative Energy Systems and Environmental Regulations, providing for findings of fact, intent and purpose, providing for regulations, providing for repeal of laws in conflict, providing for severability, providing for inclusion into the code, and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. And Susanna, if you would, please present to us.
Good evening, board members. This ordinance is another big, giant reorganization of our code, much like what we saw last time with the business master list. This one is encompassing the fact that we have been using Chapter 18A of Miami-Dade County for as long as we have been a community and a municipality. but we have never legally adapted it to our code. So we have never actually created our own landscape ordinance. What you have in front of you right now is practically a verbatim 18A, so basically everything that we have been enforcing for the last 20 years that has been merged with the little bit of tweaks that we have done over the 20 years where we had created our own little section to amend certain sections. So I've merged the two, created one section so that is all together in one place. And the only actual difference, there's actually two differences between this and the existing landscape ordinance for Miami-Dade County. In one, we are expanding the width of the aisles in commercial parking lots to be 7 feet instead of 5, because that's the recommended width for trees to be able to take root. And the other change is the artificial turf part of it, which the Miami-Dade Code ordinance did not mention artificial turf in any way, and we were feeling that it was time to start addressing it as something to be regulated. If you want me to go into the artificial turf ordinance, or do you want to discuss the landscape part first?
Absolutely, if you would.
All right. The artificial turf part of the ordinance, we are basically mimicking other municipalities around us, Miami Shores, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, Key Biscayne, in allowing the artificial turf only in the backyards, only in the areas that would right now be either impermeable concrete or sod, grass. Because remember that we have a maximum sod that you can have. Sod, we mean grass, like natural grass. Single-family homes are not allowed to have all their open space be grass, because grass is a very high need kind of landscaping. So right now, the maximum of the open space that you can have as grass is 60%. What we are suggesting is that 60% can be replaced with artificial sod, following certain guidelines, which make sure that is a high-quality artificial sod that is installed in a manner that is not going to be detrimental to the environment, with underlying layer that is not made out of materials that could be seeping stuff into the soil, and making sure that we have good oversight over that. And only the portions that can be right now sod or impermeable would be allowed to be used as artificial turf. And at the same time, require a 3-foot barrier of landscaping all around the property so that no actual water escapes the property because of drainage issues, and that you allow some soil retention as well.
So if you were a square lot, let's use a square, there would be 3 feet in the entire diameter of the property would have to be natural.
And remember, only in the backyard. So in the front yard, there would be no artificial turf at all. So in the front yard, all materials would have to be natural.
So for anyone who might be considering the idea of doing the artificial in their front yards, that will not be allowed.
Not at this time, no. Not with the ordinance that you have in front of you.
Now, can the AstroTurf be placed on the bare ground, or it has to be on concrete? The turf.
So
Put
right
it
now,
on
the
a-
way
on a
that is
solid-
installed, it is, you can install it, you can just lay it down on top of concrete. That makes for a very rough surface to walk on, because it's just like walking on concrete, only greener. The way that is usually installed is that they put an underlayer of soft material that in the past has been cut up tires, which is why we're being very careful not to allow that kind of material, because that would not be allowed in a landfill, and that seeps dirt, that seeps materials into the soil. There is other materials that they can use that are rubberized materials that pass a test, and it's specified in the ordinance, but it's a test that makes sure, and they have to bring a certification that is going to pass that test. And this is a soft material that bounces when you walk on it. And this is usually, sometimes they also put mulch or other natural materials like corn husk or pine pine or cedar mulch. Again, because of the walkability of it. If you just lay it on top of concrete, it doesn't feel nice to walk on.
And also the other problem is that concrete's not pervious, so it affects the pervious area. So most of these materials that Ms. Alonso's mentioning are pervious and do allow for water to drain. Because if they do put concrete, then you affect the other issue, no? That they have to maintain a certain percentage of their lot as pervious grounds.
However, that being said, the areas that are paved with concrete right now are better with a layer of artificial sod on top because the concrete reflects a lot more heat than the artificial sod would. So it would be slightly better for maybe the temperature of the property if the artificial sod were put on it, on top of the concrete. So it may be around the pool and stuff. So, but that would be using it basically like a rug. It's also used in terraces, on rooftops, roof decks.
I have a question through the chair. Why not in the front? What is the basis for that? Because you see these homes with these concrete pods and these nice little turf in between. What you're saying is that will not be allowed?
We could make an exception because there is a place for those in between of those giant concrete slabs.
Right.
Where, yes, that would not matter if that was used as artificial sod because it wouldn't be the true use of artificial sod. What the ordinance right now is trying to speak of is more about the whole scale of just blanket large areas of artificial sod, 240 square feet, 500 square feet of artificial sod. And no, that would not be appropriate on the front because on the front you do want natural materials.
Right. I'm just concerned because what I have learned, because usually when I read something, if it doesn't say I can't do it, to me it says I could do it, but then after speaking with Lorenzo, it says no, if it doesn't say it there, we can't do it. So my concern is if it doesn't say they can do it, they're not going to be allowed to do it, and they're going to have to come here for a variance on those, I guess, items. So
That's something that could be added as an explanation onto the driveway area, but that would add it on the driveway area as an exception to the artificial turf. But it's not here right now.
Through the chair, as you were saying, and of course, I've seen a lot of them being installed, and I think that that's more decorative, right? So
Yeah,
we
right.
can add it as decorative in between the slabs of concrete.
Right.
But certainly, I think I'm leaning towards the fact that I wouldn't want artificial turf to be, strewn on through the front yard, and it wouldn't look nice.
And I completely agree. I understand that, I guess you don't want like this football turf looking thing in the front of the yard. Aesthetically, it's not okay, but when I read it, you see all these homes in Miami Lakes already have it and they look beautiful. So I would just agree that if there's a way we could put something that it's like aesthetic or for like a decorative purpose somehow, that should be allowed.
And just to clear up, we're talking about the in between the slabs, right? So that just a narrow 1 inch strip between the slabs of concrete on the The ones that I've seen are about 1 inch or 2. They're not very thick. They're basically like a joint. 6 inches is this big. Right, so that it looks like a joint at the end of the day, yeah.
It would be like a grout in a
Like
sense,
grout and tile,
right?
correct.
It would be like grouting in a sense, correct? That's what you're visually thinking. I have a question, please, about how this is regulated within the town. This is a zoning component?
So artificial sod does not require a building permit. And this is where the challenge begins. Because they do not need to get a building permit, what we're gonna do is regulate it like we do the tiki huts and ask them to get a zoning permit, which means that they come in, they bring us drawings, we give them and they still have to bring in all the paperwork that certifies that the sod, the artificial turf is certified to a certain grade, that it has the permeability that it is required to have, that the undersoil that they're going to be putting in is compliant with the regulation and all that stuff, and then go and be able to perform an inspection with a zoning permit, yes.
And if you would expand further on the regulation of the product. When you buy windows, windows have an NOA rating. Is there a rating on turf as far as what is a better product versus another? You mentioned earlier some of the products were made with the backing of like old tires. How do you protect the integrity of our waterways and lakes if that's the case? So do we have a product that's recommended? Do you have samples of the product so that we can evaluate the drainage component to them?
I left them upstairs. I can go get them. They're in my office. If I don't have samples of the rubberized material that goes underneath, that I don't have. However, all you want to, please. The materials themselves do come with certifications of testing by engineering companies that actually do that testing for them, and they do come in with letters that say what's the permeability ratio of the sod, what is the durability of the material, and the same thing for the under materials. This is pretty standard for construction materials because these are questions that are asked. What we need to do through the zoning permit is to make sure that we collect that information, that we verify it, and that we make sure that the materials that they're using are using materials that can be disposed of in regular landfills, that they're landfillable materials, so that basically that they're going to decompose in a rational manner, that they're not going to be causing seepage and other stuff like that. And the only way that we can do that is through a zoning permit.
I initially thought that would be a building permit, and that's why, but it is not, it's zoning. And one of the things and do we have anything in the code as far as how far this can be from the lakes, or there's nothing in that?
There's nothing, right now, I was explaining before, the way it's written right now, it would be allowed in the backyards if there is a seawall, all the way to the seawall. But if there is no seawall, it would have to be to the tie line, because you would not want these substances to be adjacent to the water on the lake for many reasons. So the tie line is usually where any concrete would be ending, and that's where we would end this product. If there is a seawall in the back, so in the case of the townhouses, they can go all the way to the seawall and then tack it to the inside of the seawall so that it doesn't seep over the seawall.
One of the questions that I have is that because of when you look at the artificial turf, the number of drainage holes, what is the potential for mold and mildew to collect?
That is something I haven't
that
found a lot
product?
of, it's a very good question. I haven't found a lot of literature on that. I'm afraid that most of the testing on these materials is done in northern states where the moisture is not as high as here. So I don't know how it, and what you have is the lowest grade and the highest grade of the same brand of just for comparison's sake. The lowest grade is something that we would actually prefer we don't get because it just looks worse all around. The higher grade one, you can see that it has it mimics even a little bit of the brown stuff in it. It's a little thicker. The grass is even shorter. It's a better looking product. And then obviously we wouldn't want to require that a specific brand of artificial turf be used. We're trying to make generic regulations that would apply to all brands so that the residents could really choose their brand, but the regulations have to be the same for everybody. So at the same time, they do have to meet certain permeability requirements. And the permeability requirement is 30 inches per minute. Is that it? 30 is listed in the And they have to bring in the letter that says that they meet that requirement.
It would be my understanding, I mean, obviously, some of this turf has been used for a long time, but there might not be as much information available because it is still relatively new in some components as far as if in fact it would be a collector of mold and mildew. And if that's something, I don't know how you regulate that or control that. It's based on whatever the product is and where it is. How this would be utilized in a different climate would be different than it is here with the humidity level and the amount
That's a
of rain
concern.
and so
That's
forth that
certainly a
we have.
concern. And to what degree, but for that, the choice is either you allow it or you don't. There's no,
Is there any further question or discussion?
And for further clarification, the permeability requirement that we're bringing is 30 inches per hour per square yard. So I'm guessing that because this is the permeability requirement that they're asking for pretty much all in the South Florida region, that maybe this is where
The standard
it's,
is.
right, so that it dries enough that it doesn't collect as much mold or as fast.
If we're ready, is there any anything else as far as your assessment and recommendation that you wanted to discuss with us, or you've completed
I
your
think we
report?
covered most things. It's not, the precautions for installation around existing trees is they have to be careful around, if there's a tree, they can't put it over the roots because the roots need to air as well. So that there's a lot of regulations that are going in here that would be monitored as part of the zoning, part of the zoning inspection.
Getting back to Ms. Matos' comment about the NOA, does this product have one?
Yes, they come with a letter, a certification letter from their engineers. And that's the best you can do because it wouldn't be an NOA because it's not a building material, it doesn't go through
But
the building
something
permits.
similar to,
Right. But it's something similar enough to the NOA.
if we are ready to proceed, do we have a motion at this time?
I would put forth a motion to approve it, but to somehow allow the front to have the ability to put in the decorative turf as well.
Yeah, the decorative.
The decorative strips of artificial turf.
And perhaps we cap that with a limit not to exceed 3 inches or 4 inches, whatever the board decides.
Not to exceed 4 inches. Yeah.
Are you making that motion?
Yes.
Do we have a second?
I think I have seconded with I second the amendment to the original motion.
Terrific. Would you call the roll?
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Board Member Leoncio,
Yes,
Board Member Yanes,
Yes.
Chairwoman Matos.
Yes. The motion passes. And we're moving on to item number 5B, the West Lakes driveway. Susanna, do you have a report?
May I read the ordinance?
I'm sorry, yes.
Point of order?
My apologies.
No. Thank you, Chair. An ordinance of the Town of Miami Lakes, Florida, relating to driveways in residential districts, amending Chapter 13 Land Development Code at Article 5, allowable encroachments into the required yards and exceptions to the maximum permitted heights, providing for findings of fact, intent and purpose, providing for regulations, providing for repeal of laws in conflict, providing for severability, providing for inclusion into the code, and providing for an effective date.
Susanna, if you would proceed.
This item is coming as a consequence of several neighbors of the West Lakes area that have narrower lots. and have found themselves in the situation in the last few months where they needed to replace their driveways that were built existing with no verifiable permits, and in configurations that are not what the code allows today. As we have discussed in the past in previous variances and in previous items, what the code allows right now in any single-family home property is a curb cut, and a curb cut is defined as the intersection between the entrance and egress of vehicles and the sidewalk. So that intersection is allowed to have a maximum length of 20 feet. In any one residence, they can have 2 of those curb cuts, one at 10 feet and one more at 20 feet, for a total maximum of 30, to be able to get vehicles in and out of the property for parking areas. The maximum parking area is 60% of the front yard. So between these two numbers, you marry the amount of parking spaces that are allowed inside the property. Some larger properties with larger front yards and wider properties usually end up having a lot more parking allowed, and narrower properties begin to be a little more stripped of it. The trouble that we have in the narrower lots is that the circular driveway is a very forced configuration on them. It's very tight, it's very uncomfortable, it doesn't feel right, and they end up basically paving from side to side from the difficulty of having a decent driveway in. In order to maybe help this condition so that these narrower lots do have a little bit wider of an area for parking and still meet their 60% required maximum paved area, and so that they have at least a 40% landscaped area in the front yard. The effort of this ordinance is to allow them to do a continuous curb cut of 30 feet. So instead of the 10 and 20 that they're reasonably allowed right now in 2 separate cuts, allow them to do it all at once, up to 60% of their lot width, so that they don't go over their 60% required maximum impermeable area, and therefore allow them to have a larger area to park the cars without having a circular driveway. Also, this allows them to have the 40% of landscape area consolidated all in one piece, which gives better space for trees and for larger trees to take root and provide some shade on the property as well.
I have a question. So the increase on the curb cut, is that infringing into the green area?
So if it's a regular property, by that I mean a property that is wider than 50 feet, they would already allow the 30 feet curb cut. They would be allowed a 10 and a 20 for a total of 30 feet, correct? The maximum impermeable area is a percentage of the front of the property. It's a 60%. And that's the part that we're trying not to change. So at the end of the day, if you have a narrower lot, so if you have a 50-foot lot, you're still going to get the 30 feet of curb cut. If you have a smaller lot than 50, if it's 45 feet, it's only going to be 27 feet, because that's the 60%. But that still gives you a little more of a space. And at the same time, you're consolidating all the open space in one corner. So you're getting a chunk of concrete and a chunk of dirt all together, and not little patches scattered all throughout the property where it's harder to grow landscape material. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
My question was the percentage, the required percentage of green area in the front. Is that going to be compromised?
No, that's what I was saying. So the required percentage of green area on the front continues to be 40% of the front of the home for every property, and this is just an effort of consolidating it all together so that they can have a more something that they can use a little better.
So they will be allowed to have a 30-foot driveway?
If the property is 50 feet, yes.
50 feet?
If the property is 50 feet wide,
Uh-huh,
yes, 30 feet.
30 feet.
If the property is less than 50 feet, 60%
Right, yeah,
of
10,
the.
20, 10,
yes.
20.
In Westlake, are there lots, would the minimum be 45 feet?
I haven't found any that are smaller than 45 feet within RU1Zs. In townhouse developments, they are much narrower, but we're not discussing townhouse developments, we're talking only about the RU1Cs, and those are, the smallest ones I've seen are 45.
Through the chair, Vice Chair. So we're just discussing, this is approving only folks that reside in zero lot line homes.
We have extended it to single-family homes that are 50 feet or less in width, because there are so few scattered throughout the town, and they would naturally face the same sort of challenges. So we're not limiting it just to the RU1Z, we're allowing it all throughout, because what's good for the good goose is good for the gander. It's not a matter of the RU1Cs. And I find that is a better condition than a forced circular driveway in a narrow lot. Again, because the forced circular driveway kind of ends up with a patchwork of small open spaces that doesn't really make it a good space for anything.
Having served on the flood advisory board for a long period of time over the years, obviously the biggest concern in that area is drainage. How does this impact?
Hopefully, by bringing more residences into compliance with the 40-60 ratio, it's going to help the drainage a little bit. Right now, the biggest problem we have is that because people are forcing these larger circular driveways and these larger parking configurations, they're ending up just basically paving from side to side, which is really not a good condition, particularly for drainage. So we're hoping that allowing them a little bit wider of a curb cut and to consolidate their parking on one side of the property, that they're going to have an incentive to have more permeable areas in the front of the house.
The 30-foot curb cut, will it have to be in the center of the lot, or can it be on the zero lot line?
It could be all the way up to the zero lot line, or on the other side, they have to leave a 4-foot, one of the sides of the zero lot is a zero side, the other side has to be a 4-foot easement. So they can go anywhere within those 41 feet and place it however it be convenient for their garage or for their parking configuration.
And this would essentially just allow 2 cars to park, right, in this narrow driveway?
So 20 feet allows 2 cars
No, 30
and
feet.
almost 3.
30.
3 cars.
In 20 feet, you can almost park 3 cars. If they're smaller cars, you can certainly park 3 in 20 feet. If you live in Miami Beach, I think we park 5 cars in 20 feet, but now I'm just making bad jokes. But in 30 feet, you can certainly fit, if you want to open the doors very comfortably, you fit a good 4 cars.
Are there any further questions? From anyone here? Are we prepared to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt what the staff has recommended in regards to the driveways, adopting them for anything with a lot size of 50 feet or less.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Yanes,
Yes.
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Board Member Leoncio,
No.
Vice Chairwoman Matos.
Yes. The motion passes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. I'd like to proceed with the new business items. And Chairperson Yanis, you have a item, cul-de-sac driveways? Would you like to present that to us?
Yes, so I've never done this before while I'm here, but I think both JC and I have a few items we wish to put forth. My first one is the situation we had that with cul-de-sacs, I think have come up a few times here, particularly that resident who came in and you could almost, you couldn't even really drive across around it. And they had to come here for a variance to attempt to turn in to the driveway. And that radius, I think, when applying those standards in terms of driveways, widths, or whatnot, I think cul-de-sacs are unique. Kind of what we're discussing now with certain homes and the way they're designed. Cul-de-sacs, I think, are unique and we shouldn't apply uniformly the way we do to a regular street road that has a north and south or an east and west, and they have the ability to turn a radius completely. When you have a cul-de-sac, you could barely fit the one car around it. And to be able to turn in, especially that home that continues to come to mind, which is right in the corner, it isn't the same as a regular street home. I think there should be considerations for residents who have homes on a cul-de-sac, at least as it pertains to section 13-1508 specifically. So that was my suggestion to be put before the council because of that resident and other residents and my own experience doing so.
I think this is the first time since I've served on this board that we've had new business items. Am I correct? Nice
Correct.
job.
Yes.
That's great. So at this point in time, does anybody on the board have? Am I correct in understanding that we would need to make a motion to proceed to move this forward for the council review?
Well, the idea or the concept is that if you have an idea that you want the council to consider, okay, you propose your idea, you propose how you would want to see that amended or incorporated into the code, and then give us some direction of going back to the council and seeking, their approval to move it forward. At the end, you're an advisory committee. You're also the local planning agency. So as a local planning agency, now you're wearing the hat of a planner and advising the council as to things that, and matters that our local development code can, our land development code rather, can be improved.
I have a question. Do you know how many cul-de-sac driveways there are in the town of Miami Lakes? Do we
No.
know that?
How many cul-de-sac driveways?
So not at this time. That would be part of the study that would be done in order to be able to recommend any changes to the council. So by the time, so what you're doing right now is recommending that the council recommends that we study it. You're forwarding it to the council to recommend that we study it, then we would study it, then it would be coming back to you as an ordinance, much in the form of the driveways or the landscape ordinance, complete in a form where it actually has text and what are we striking out and what are we adding in. So no, I can't answer those questions at this time, other than the things
just
that we have
curious if we
naturally
know.
seen as a board,
Right.
which, geometry has dictated in the past, so.
So as this item has come in front of us previously, it's the natural progression, if you will, that we keep it moving forward. Is that your reason
Right,
for
and
bringing it forward?
I just, correct. And just based on the observation from what we've seen on the board and from what we've experienced and from what residents have discussed, I think it's something that needs to be looked into by the
Studied
council.
further.
Studied to,
So then we would need to make a motion, if you'd like to do that?
I just have a question. Are you asking for this board to for anything specific at this time, or just for us? In other words, are we gonna so no longer would they have to come to this board for a variance? So if we would pass something where we're going to ask the council to look into making anybody who lives in a cul-de-sac not have to come in front of this board to be able to build their driveway.
No. I think, for example, just a basic, see, in this way, the circular driveway, both approaches couldn't exceed 30, so it would have to be 15 and 15, just like it would in a regular street. In that case, another case, I didn't think that was appropriate. I think a more appropriate number would have been 20 and 20, because that would allow them the appropriate radius to get in, because they can't even turn into the 15 from where they were. Without the appropriate studies on the cul-de-sac, I don't think it's prudent to say the council shall change the number to this. I think the appropriate recommendation would be that it should be studied, and it should come back to us later on as, you know, the item before and the item before that, which is there's an actual study and consideration done on these driveways and what's the actual appropriate limitations, if you will, before that. So they would still have to get approval and for driveways or anything like that, and anything above that would have to be a variance. But I think an actual review of that should be done by the council and then sent back to us with their recommendations for our discussion on true numbers. I don't think I could say it should be changed from 25 to 27, or because I don't think we have enough on that yet.
Agreed.
But that, that ordinance that was just passed, the lots with 50-foot frontage, wouldn't that apply to a cul-de-sac lot?
No. No, because the cul-de-sac lots are not necessarily less than 50 feet wide. Most of them are much larger.
Oh, no, it could go from, I'm gonna use 50, from 50 to 200. I mean,
Correct.
in my cul-de-sac block, I mean, in the back, I mean, it's huge, the amount of seawall that they have.
Correct. And that's why it wouldn't apply to them.
That wouldn't apply. So then it would have to, so how is it regulated right now on the cul-de-sacs?
It's the same as every other property.
Same as the other property, the
Yes,
60,
so
40,
10 and 20 or
60,
15-15. They can have a circular driveway, 10 and 20, or 15 and 15.
Right, no, it's very, very hard to maneuver on a circular, and I see it, 'cause we have, all them four are friends of ours, so it's bad.
I mean, yeah, I think they need, I mean, that's why. I think it needs to be studied, because just like we say, we hear from, for example, the Westlake, and they can't get in, and therefore, after studying and research it, we say, this is what's appropriate, this is what seems fair, and we're going to still keep it 60-40 and whatnot. I think from a practical perspective, we all know that you can't get in from a cul-de-sac in the circular driveway the same way you can in a regular street road. It's just, numerous people have come before that. I mean, we have seen people, and we ourselves have not been able to do it even passing by it. But I'm not going to say it must be this feet or this amount of feet without actually having it studied. I do think as a board, we're also responsible for recognizing issues that's coming before us, and then, at that point, bring it to the attention of the council for some sort of a mindful review as to what the issues may be. So that would be my motion, but not as verbose.
Was that your motion?
Yes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion?
No.
Would you call the roll, Madam Clerk?
Board Member Leoncio,
Yes,
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Board Member Yanes,
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Matos.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And we're on to the next new business item. Board Member Fernandez, town signage.
So this item comes about because as a realtor in the town, we many times or oftentimes come across residents and even our neighbors to the north, south, east of us who are confused as to where the boundaries are. So I'm gonna, if you guys will follow me here, I'm going to just take you on, just try to follow me and where I'm going with it. So if we get off on Miami Lakes Drive, and we may agree that it's the quintessential street in Miami Lakes, we're getting off the Palmetto, whether we're traveling north or southbound, we're both of them face the north. You make a left, so you're on Miami Lakes Drive right now, and then you make your very first right. So you were just on Miami Lakes Drive, you make your right. So if you're following me, you're going north on the Palmetto Frontage Road. Cancun, the shopping center, will be on your left, and you're traveling north. Where does Miami Lakes end? There's so many folks that I see, and I don't know if my fellow board member and colleague as a realtor, if you come across so much confusion. It could actually be a public safety issue too, because many times they may call our police department, non-emergency line, right? And you know, to have them go out when they're really not in the town. I know that it's come across me many times where there are residents that are in that area that believe that they live in Miami Lakes, and they don't. So and I'm glad that our town manager, Mr. Peterman, is here, and thanks for joining us, by the way. Maybe we can direct either the town staff or the council to be able to see if we can, somewhere along that street, provide a sign simple sign. I'm not talking about a water feature or anything expensive, but something that indicates where the town ends. Because, of course, the stuff on the left-hand side as you're driving north is Miami Lakes. The stuff on the right is not. And there's a pocket of homes there that that are there before the next street, which is 169th Street. So there's a pocket of homes, and there's a church, the Greek Orthodox Church. And it goes beyond that. Anything north of that, many folks believe that they're in Miami Lakes. It's not about being elitist. It's not about, I think it's just that we should be clear as to our boundary and kind of help with some of the confusion. So I don't know if there's any other boundaries that don't have a sign that says we're leaving Miami Lakes or entering Miami Lakes. We can maybe look for those too, but I know that one seems to me that it's confusing. So, any discussion?
I think that, and you bring up a really valid point about people who are in our area who think they're in Miami Lakes. And I agree, it's not about being elitist or anything else, it's where are we? And I think there are parts of town where obviously I live on the east side, my office is on the east side, and people who are on 57th Avenue sometimes don't realize that some of that area up 57th Avenue, where the educational center is and where Costco is, and some of that area is still in fact Miami Lakes. We have some natural borders, obviously, the Palmetto being one. So this is the only component as it pertains to signage that we're discussing tonight?
Yeah. As far as my item is concerned, yes.
So I think that's okay to clarify it, but in order for the conversation to progress, someone should make a motion to accept his item, second it, and then you can open for discussion and then vote.
No, I have a question.
We have a wild mic tonight.
I have a question. If you're looking for borders, you have the canal, and you have the excuse me, and you have the Palmetto.
Right.
And then on the left side, you're going like this. Then you have the hotel, and some empty lot. So and that area on the right, on the left, is not Miami Lakes.
The area on the left is. If you're traveling north, the area on the left is. The area on the right is not. But she makes an interesting point. Because Vice Chair was saying that the Palmetto is certainly a natural border and something that's very clear. But there are homes on the inside of that don't belong to Miami Lakes. And certainly, after anything north of 169th Street, is no longer Miami Lakes. And there is a Leaving Miami Lakes sign on 170th and 78th Avenue, but there isn't one on that street. So we have San Mateo, we have Turtle Run, we have Lindiana Estate, all those neighborhoods that are north, that even to give less work for our staff, or sometimes they come here maybe requesting building permits, and I've asked, and it does happen, where they believe that they live in the town and they don't. So even to alleviate some of the confusion there.
If I can ask the question, with regards to the code, the portion of the code that addresses signs, is there a component in the code about this? Susanna?
No. Signage that is basically letting people know whether or not they live on Miami Lakes is not contemplated by the town code. They would be monument signs. They would have to, but they would be designed by the town and be located in property that is owned by the town. And that's usually the challenge, is finding the right location for it.
Is there any further
Would you propose like a specific type of signage, like the big ones that say, "Welcome to Miami Lakes," or just kind of some sort of signage that?
A perfect example would be the one that is, if you're traveling northbound on 82nd Avenue, the small white sign that divides Palm Springs North and Miami Lakes in the neighborhood of Royal Oaks. So I think that the challenge would be, and again, it's to direct the town staff to find an appropriate spot for that sign, because I do understand that it has to be in our town, on town property, but there is some space that I've seen that where we can put it on. And I'd be happy to make a trip with somebody if they'd ask me to.
Are we ready to proceed with the motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the request.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Board Member Leoncio,
Yes?
Board Member Yanes,
Yes.
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Matos. Motion passes.
Just as a point of clarification, because I just received a text and it's true, just so you know, we can discuss and make the proposal as you voted to the council to look at signs, but be aware that anything with regards to sign and the regulations, especially as it pertains to right-of-way, we have to go through the county in order to get permission.
Okay. So this one I have more of whereas the first one was more of a let's look into what's going on. My last two are more of specific requests based upon discussions I've had with residents and numerous other individuals who have approached to discuss this, specifically as it relates to 15062 of the Land Development Code. It's essentially to allow larger encroachment by attached canopies and porches in rear yards for properties where standalone gazebos or accessory structures is not feasible. And mainly because right now, if you read it, it's a maximum of 7 feet, and my proposal is to allow a maximum of 10. And that's because a lot of times residents have approached me and said, well, it's like 8, it's 9. And if you look at a lot of other, even in this accessory buildings, there's 12, there's a higher number, and this 7 feet out doesn't allow them the full benefit to aesthetically attain what they wish in their home. And it's not very much, it's only 3 feet more. It allows them to have that standard 7.5, 8, 9, which seems to be proposed sometimes from whoever's building it. And my proposal is to change it to 10, and, after reviewing a lot of the code, it seems to be more consistent with what's allowed versus this small kind of 7 feet, so that's what I would propose. So I guess I'll just make a motion, and then we could have the discussion. Is that what you want us to do instead better?
Yes, I
Okay.
think that would be the proper. You've already said what
Okay.
your new business item is.
Okay.
Somebody makes a motion to accept it the way you presented it, somebody seconds it, and if they don't, then it dies.
Okay. So I guess I would make the motion to
Correct.
accept it, to change Section 13506-2A, which allows a maximum of 7 feet, to allow it to be a maximum of 10 feet.
Is there a second for discussion?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the item?
I'd like more clarification. I think I understand. What you're asking is that you want to move our code from allowing 7-foot fence.
No. So in the rear, it's the canopy. So essentially from, yeah.
The hedge,
Right.
excuse me.
Right. Right.
Okay.
So instead of from 7 to 10, just to have better cover, just because sometimes they can't cut it at 7 feet, is what I've been hearing, and they're,
That.
If I may suggest a little change to what she's proposing, only from the purpose of like expanding it a little more and making it a little more fair. Instead of proposing right now a particular number, just allow that to be a little more flexible so that if the study results in something that is different in some way, you don't block it in at this time. Also because the ideal situation would be that this expanded canopies would be used instead of gazebos. And therefore, there's a maximum square footage that they're allowed to have a gazebo in the backyard. You would want to have this canopied areas be able to become about the size of what a gazebo would be, so that properties where a gazebo is unfeasible is able to have a nice covered area for their summer kitchen or for whatever other reasons they need to have in the backyard. And for that reason, I would suggest that you make your recommendation a little less concrete and a little more flexible, so that we can come back with a number that is maybe a percentage of the rear yard or
Okay.
maybe something with the basis of the 350 feet that they're allowed.
to increase it.
Right, just to
Something.
increase it, and let's see what we come back with, because it's going to be depending also on the size of the rear yards that we find. This is going to be basically for the smaller rear yards, for the rear yards that are maybe 20 feet wide, maybe the ones that are, we have a few that are even less than 20 feet. Some of them that are on water lots have particularly narrow rear yards, so this may be an effort for them to be able to have a covered structure without it being a detached gazebo.
Does she then have to amend what her motion would be, or will be able to proceed ahead as we are?
I would think so. Yes, correct, yeah. Or somebody can amend the motion, right?
Would you call the roll?
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Board Member Yanes,
Yes.
Board Member Leoncio,
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Montos.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And we are on to new business item 6D, Infinity Edge Pools. Board Member Yanes.
So this came about obviously our last time when I found out it was nowhere in the code. And I think we were all kind of surprised that it was nowhere in the code, and it's so nice, and the residents put so much more money into it. And again, I was under the assumption that if it's not in, that means it can, and Lorenzo told me, no, if it's not in there, we can't have it. So my proposal is to include the Infinity Edge pool as an option, as one there. So I would propose a motion to add an amendment to the Land Development Code to allow Infinity Edge pool basins to encroach upon the tide line, the way it's, yeah.
And I'll second it. Is there any further discussion?
No.
Would you please call the roll?
Board Member Leoncio,
Yes?
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Board Member Yanes.
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Matos.
Yes.
Motion passes.
This basically finishes what we started, correct? The last time. Awesome. Is there a director's report?
And during the last town council, we finished second reading on the business master list, which was a great, great undertaking, and I'm very proud of it because it took a lot of work from all y'all, and it's a thing now. Now our code is nice and simple to read, so I'm very proud of that. We'll remember that was the basis for the overlay. So the next step on that business master list is going to be starting to look at overlays and how we can introduce economic development into certain areas that need it, using our the allowable uses and how they play together. So that's the next step of that.
Will that come back to us at some point? then?
Correct. Yes, most
Okay.
certainly.
Okay.
Probably several
That
times.
was a great job. That was a
Yes.
big project. So it's great for us to hear that we were following that anyway. I'm sure everybody
Yes.
was, because that was a big item. But thank you for all
Yes.
your hard work and efforts. That was awesome.
Also, we're still working on the mobility fee. There's still some tweaking that is going on as to the mobility fee and the mobility fee numbers. If I think Lorenzo can tell us.
So two things. One of them is we're probably, originally when the mobility fee was calculated and we came up with the 400 and some number, it was taking into account a lot of projects that were somewhat placed on the strategic plan as possible ideas, but were not necessarily projects that had been voted on and approved by the council. And the council will be having a strategic plan retreat now in May, where they're going to be discussing those items. So that number was driven up to that 400. Since then, we've taken a real hard look at that and realized that perhaps the number should be somewhere closer to 287. So we've gone back to Cordino, our advisors, and requested that they look at that and give us an opinion with regards to that number. At the same time, we had a meeting today with some of the Grahams, and we're going to be meeting with Phil Wiley, hopefully sometime next week. I hear that he might be celebrating nuptials soon, so hopefully we can meet with him before then and discuss and make sure that if they have any additional concerns, we address those. But we should be moving to have that mobility fee finalized in April.
If there's,
Wait, one just point of privilege, if I may. I just wanted to congratulate Vice Chair Matos on the Food and Wine Festival.
thank you so much.
I think
So much
that
fun to
the
have
town
everybody there.
has a great time. All that went, we enjoyed it, and what you're doing with the funds that are collected from the event for a foundation or for the kids. I know that you're passionate about that, but the money is going to the kids, and everyone wins. Win, win, win. So,
Thank you so much for your
Congratulations.
kind words. You
Oh,
know,
I mean it.
everybody here personifies kindness, and I appreciate everything. Your support means the world to me. Thank you so much.
we had a great time.
If there's nothing else, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We are
Aye.
adjourned.